Hi guys, so this is the video 2. So if you've just joined me for my introductory series to Ayurveda, maybe go back and catch the other video, which is just a quick introduction to Ayurveda, and then come back to this video. What we're going to be discussing in this video is the 5 elements and also the 20 gunas, or the 20 qualities. So basically in my first video I said like increases like and opposites pacify. So to be able to make that philosophy work for you, you really need to be able to understand what qualities there are, so that then you can apply the opposite quality in order to restore health. And these qualities are found everywhere. So we can see these qualities in our environment, we can see them within our body, we can see them in our food choices, we can see them in our emotions. So that's basically what we're looking at, is these qualities show up in all aspects of our lives, and it's just being able to identify when those qualities are coming up. But before we get to the 20 qualities or 20 gunas, we're going to talk about the 5 elements. Now the 5 elements, this is probably more like looking at the 5 states of matter. So when we say 5 elements, we're not thinking of, the periodic table and the elements in that regard. We're talking about more broader than that, and looking at just breaking down into the states of matter. So there's 5 elements according to Ayurveda, and the first one is akasha, or space. So space is an empty void, basically. It is the space within everything else is contained. So it is an empty void. So if we think about space in general, and even if we look at the universe and the space, it's generally cold and dark and nothingness. It's basically just empty space. And so that is the first element with Ayurveda. The next element is the element of air, or vayu, and basically this element is still very subtle. There's not a lot going on, but there is this and so even before they knew about the elements and these tiny invisible particles, in Ayurveda we knew that there was empty space, and then there was more subtle aspects within that space. So if we think of air as gases, so they're tiny particles that are mobile and they're moving around, but they are quite subtle, often invisible. And they're still quite cold in nature if we're looking at the qualities, and they sort of start to fill that void or that space. The next element we come across is the fire element, and the fire element is a little bit like the plasma state, and we can associate this with the sun in the greater environment. So it's this molten plasma state. This is the first time where we start to see that there's heat, is one of the qualities in the fire element. So we've definitely got that heat. It's light because it illuminates things and shines light, but it's also very light in nature because it doesn't have a lot of density. It's not as light as air and space, but it's certainly lighter than earth and water. So it's quite light. It also has a slight oily, slippery, lubricating feel to fire, and fire is also quite sharp and penetrating, and fire is also transformative as well. So I'm just bringing up some key words here to associate with the fire element, because fire, if you put a log on a fire, it will basically change from a solid piece of timber into coal and ash. And so fire has that ability to transform things, and it plays a really strong role in our body, in our digestion. So that's why I just wanted to highlight that point and that characteristic of the fire. But it's also sharp and penetrating. If you touch it, it sort of has that ability to be very sharp and has that penetrating action, which is another quality which we'll talk about. So the next element that we come to is the water element. Now the water is a little bit more dense as well than the air and space, so it's a little bit more solid. But we're going back to being more cool, definitely a lot more moist than the fire and the air, which the air and space are very dry in nature as well. I didn't really mention that. So now with the water element, we've got that moisture, that lubrication, that little bit of stickiness, a little bit more heavy, and it's definitely got that cool quality as well. So in the environment, we definitely see this in the oceans and the rivers, and within our body, it's not just relating to the water. Because we're talking about states of matter, we're referring referring to anything that has that liquid content to it. So it's all within our cells, within our lymphatic tissue. We're 70% water after all. So water plays quite a large role within our body as far as the elements are concerned. And the last element that we're going to talk about is the earth element. So earth is the most dense and the most subtle, and it's the building blocks of everything in nature, and it's also the building blocks of everything within our body that's quite physical and structural. So when we're looking at the elements and we say it's earth, it's not just earth, it's anything. It can be the trees and the trunks, so anything that has that more solid structural characteristics to it. So they're basically the 5 elements. We have space, with which everything else is contained. Then we have air, which is a little bit more subtle, mobile particles within the space. And then the density starts to increase, and we get the heat starting to come in as well. And so from space becomes the air, which gives a little bit of friction. That little bit of friction then develops into fire, and then fire can evaporate and cause condensation, which gives you the water element, and then the water element can settle, and then we get the earth element as well. So they're the 5 elements, and that's sort of how they are produced and built up. And then what we then go into is the 20 gunas. So basically in Ayurveda, they say there's 10 opposing pairs. So some of the most easy to understand and comprehend examples are hot and cold, wet and dry, light and heavy, mobile and static. And so as I was talking about some of those elements earlier on, I made a point of mentioning some of those key characteristics. So if we can just remember that there are 20 in total, 10 opposing pairs, and when we're looking at treating someone or restoring balance, we're always looking for the opposite pair. So like increases like, and opposites pacify. So if you've got a lot of heat in your body, a lot of fire in your body, then we're going to be looking at adding more coolness to the body, and we can either look at adding more air and ether element, or we can look at adding some more water element, because that's got the cool property as well. So depending on what elements we need to add to restore that fire balance. So basically, some of the easy ones to remember are hot and cold, light and heavy, static and mobile, dry and moist. We've got rough and smooth. So you can start to see that, they're quite easy to understand, and you can start to see those as well. So we can see those in our seasons. You can see that some foods are very light and dry. Think of popcorn. Some foods are very heavy and oily and cold, and that might be something like yogurt. And then something that's quite heating might be alcohol or chili. So you start to see that there's qualities within our foods. Then there's qualities within our emotions and qualities within our activities. So something like Bikram yoga is going to be really adding a lot more fire and heat to the body, where something like doing something in the snow or even a beach activity is going to increase more of that water element within your body as well, and that coolness. So hopefully now you can get a general understanding that everything in the greater environment and the universe and everything within our body is made up of those 5 elements, or those 5 states of matter, and that each of those elements or each of those states of matter have different qualities that are associated with them. And in order to restore balance, we simply just have to apply the opposite qualities. So that's a little wrap up for today's session. I'm going to leave it there. So I hope you join me for the next session, where we're going to delve a little bit deeper. So I'll see you soon. Bye for now.